go through. I have been making some phone calls of folks that I know have had some experience in how a committee would work with that chair and vice chair, have still not been successful in identifying someone. So I thought I would talk with the folks that are online and in the room again today. I think there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. I'm happy to chair these meetings. Really, I find in these types of committees where it's most important is once we start presenting to city council, they often will ask questions of, you know, hey, what did the committee think about this? Or what was the committee's conversation about this? And I find that it is helpful to have a committee member be able to answer those questions versus have city staff deliver that message. And so that's really where I find having that chair and vice chair is super helpful in this process. Certainly us as staff can help facilitate these things, but having someone who can speak on this committee's behalf, I think is important. So I wanted to throw that out there in case that changes someone's perspective on whether this is a job or responsibility that they would be willing to take on. So I'm going to pause for a moment so people can digest what I just shared, and then we'll see if any folks have any questions or comments. Well, I will continue to reach out to some additional folks, and we'll continue to try and work through getting that spokesperson. I'm going to turn it over to Heidi Derryberry. She is our budget section director, part of our management services team, and she's here to walk you through the financial outlook part 2. So I'll turn it over to you, Heidi.
Thanks, Shannon. So before we kick off the city financial outlook for part 2, I just wanted to mention that there were a few follow-up items from day 1 related to sales tax, primary property tax, and building permits. And I just wanted to share that we have incorporated the answers to those discussion items in those sections because we were actually going to be talking about revenues in the general fund. So I will be responding to those items as I talk about them. If there's anything I missed or there's further follow-up, please feel free just to let us know. I'm going to go ahead and get started on our financial outlook part 2. Ready? Slow. Okay, so we're going to start off today going deeper into our budgeting. Last time we met, Rick really did a lot of the overall city budget, and now we're going to start today to drill down into our general fund, airport fund, and our RIP fund, which are the funds that contain the different public safety components that we'll be talking about in this committee. So first of all, in the general fund, I just wanted to share kind of how the city is structured. So we are broken up by divisions. So you'll hear us oftentimes talk about divisions, for example, city manager, human resources, management services. So when you hear those are our division level. And then a further segregation of our divisions is we break them into sections. So for example, using management services, we have management services administration, we have purchasing, customer service, finance, grants, contracts, and emergency management, and budget. So those are all components that make up the division of management services. So this slide and the following 2 slides are just all of the different divisions and sections which are in the general fund. So I'm not going to go through them in detail, but you can see that fire, police, like I said, emergency management, all are components of the general fund. The one thing I do want to note that every division in the city has a section in the general fund with 2 exceptions. Water services has no general fund sections, and sustainability is not within the general fund. While sustainability does not have a general fund section, they actually do receive funding from general fund via transfers, which I will talk about in a little while. Slide is showing the general fund revenues. So you can see that the general fund has a variety of revenues. However, the largest two revenues that we receive in the general fund are local taxes and intergovernmental. So you can see up above, local taxes bring in about $35 million budgeted for the year and about $38 million in intergovernmental. Since those are such big numbers, I broke those down just to share. So local taxes are made up of sales tax, franchise fees, and excise tax. So franchise fees are things that are utility and cable companies where they're paying a fee for using the right of way of the city. The excise tax is actually the marijuana tax that we receive a share of from the state. And then the sales tax number, which we have been talking about. The next large category, intergovernmental revenues, include our state share taxes, which are 31 million, which Rick talked about last time we met. Then we do have grants, which are federal, state, local, foundation, etc. And then we do have a number of intergovernmental agreements, for example, with the county where we do receive contributions from the county. And then we have a number of other smaller resources that we have: charges for services, licenses and permits, fines and forfeitures, things of that nature.
That's a quick question. The state shared taxes, is that sales taxes or property taxes or some combination of many taxes?
It's the state shared sales tax, the state shared income tax, and the auto and lieu tax.
Thank you.
Right. So this slide here kind of shows a history of the revenue for our 1% sales tax and our state share revenues. I know it's kind of hard to see with all the lines on here, but the pink line on the top is the total 1% and state shared, so that's total together. The blue line here is the general fund 1% sales tax. The green line is the state shared income tax. The blue line is the state shared auto and lieu tax. So some things to note on here. You can see that there was a decline in the state shared income tax, again, the green. So you can see we were kind of chugging along and then we had a bit of a dip in 22. That was related to COVID and the delay of tax returns. So if you recall Rick talking about, there's a 2-year delay on state shared income tax returns. So that's why we saw that little bit of delay and decline in 22. In 2024, you'll see that there is a little spike there in the same state shared income tax, and that is due to a change to the allocation to cities and towns of this tax from 15% to 18%. This increase was part of the flat tax negotiations with the state, and it was intended to minimize the impacts to cities and towns. And then just as a note, we are experiencing some items in our state that will have future impacts to our state shared revenues. For example, the recent incorporation of Santan Valley will have an ongoing impact to our portion of state shared revenues as they are now an incorporated city and are part of the overall pie, I guess. Another thing that is impacting us is we're not exactly sure of the total impacts, but the big beautiful bill have impacts on our state shared revenues as well. We are looking at those and analyzing the impacts. They're just very recent things, so we are still trying to figure out how those will impact our ongoing revenues. Next slide. So here is building permit revenues. So this is the slide that we added in response to the question on how the declining building permits are impacting our general fund and how we are able to spend. And just to share, you could see every year. So this orange line is how we budget. So at the city, we budget pretty conservatively over the time, knowing that there's a lot of volatility in building permits. So when we are significantly above our budget each year, that creates one-time capacity that you can use the next year for things which are mostly driven like one-time needs for capital projects, operating capital, et cetera. So we don't rely on these big peaks as our consistent revenue. We do a conservative. You can see though out here, so here's 2026. So we currently are seeing declines in that, and we are expecting right now, based on what we've collected so far, to end very near our revenue projections for the year. We are not expecting some excess revenue. Then as a city, we would not have those one-time revenues to rely on next year as we are doing the 27 budget. Here's another slide that we added for the follow-up from day one, where there was questions on the primary property tax rates and how the change from 2020, I did from 2022, just to see the last 5 years of how that changed is what we collected. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about the rate history. So you can see, so 2022, we were at 0.7476. And actually in 2026, our rate is down to 0.6808. So over that period of time, while our revenues have been going up, we've been doing a flat levy. So the tax rate has actually been declining. The first line is our maximum allowable. Sorry, I just said our rate was 6.8. It's 6.045. The first line is our allowable. So we have a maximum allowable rate set, and we have actually approved under that rate. So we do have capacity. So the bottom line, I apologize, is our approved rate, which also is declining year over year. Slide, please. So here is how those rates are impacting our primary property tax collections. You can see that over time, the revenue has been slowly increasing. Only from 2020, we collected about 6.9 million. And in 2026, we're estimating 7. So that the blue line is our actuals and our estimates that we plan at this time. And then that orange line in those out years is the 2% levy increased capacity that we actually have. So we are collecting estimated $7.2 million. But if we had done the property tax increases, we could be collecting upwards of 8.
You know, one of the things that I'm presuming is pretty hard to factor in is that the county, from what I understand, is approximately 2 years behind in terms of the actual increase in values of properties. They don't do actual appraisals, they go by statistics on closed sales and so on and so forth. And so they're always running a couple of years behind. So I know that looking at my own property tax bill, it's about $400 more now than it was in 2020. But I'm expecting that to go up because I know that the county is a couple of years behind during a period of time when we had significant increases in property values. So how does the city go about trying to estimate what their revenue might be when they don't really have a clear picture of what values being assessed today because the county is behind by a certain amount of time?
So for the city, and Brandy may have to jump in, she's our property tax expert, but I'll do my best. For our budget years, so actual assessed values, for example, for 2025 are what we budget for collections in 26. So right there, we're always on kind of a year lag, right? And then as far as our outward projecting, we put in modest growth based on historical assessed values increases. So That's how we project those years out, and then obviously adjust as we get the updated assessed values each year from the county. Am I missing anything on that?
Oh, and I would just add, per state statute, we are only allowed to increase your assessed value 5% every year. So that's the rule that the assessor has, assuming you haven't made any large modifications to your property that would increase it beyond that, any new construction and so forth. So there is a cap. So even if your property values went up 20% in 1 year, state statute limits it to a 5% increase on your assessed value. So we can use that as an indicator as well. The county usually does provide a projection for the following year at the time that they provide us the number for, what's going to happen in 26. They give us a projection of what they think is going to happen in 27, because you're right, they are on a 2-year delay, partially because they're doing the assessments, then they're sending out those notices. Property owners have an opportunity to ask questions or appeal their assessed value. So by the time that all rolls in, it does take about 2 years before we have an actual assessed value to calculate.
And one of the things that I've been working on with the county assessor and our state Realtor Association is the challenge that comes up on new construction, because the state requires roughly an 18-month delay in the time you acquire a property when your property can actually be, when the taxes can actually be increased, to give you that time to appeal. Okay. But on new construction, that's a non-issue, because as a buyer, if you buy a brand new house in one of the new subdivisions, you know exactly what you paid for the house. It appraised for that price. The county assessor is given a certificate, an affidavit of value immediately when you close on that house for that value. As a buyer, you expect to pay the taxes for that value, but yet you get a bonus for 18 months to 2 years and you're taxed as a vacant lot. Okay, so I'm working to try to figure out how we can change that at the state level, because it can only happen at the state level. It can't happen locally, which will allow every taxing district to just simply recover those monies from new construction sooner than later, which would certainly have a positive impact on budgeting and so forth.
I think Michelle might have a question online as well. Michelle, did you still have a question or a comment?
I think I've answered it, but I wasn't clear on what the 2% levy increase capacity is about. But I guess that maybe goes back to one of Rick Tatter's presentations last week, 2 weeks ago, that could be collected, right? But we're not collecting it now.
Yeah, it would have to be approved by council. They can approve the 2% increase, and they have not for the last 7 years now.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
That's a state statute limitation on our primary property taxes.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I can't see that screen over there. All right, moving on. So now I want to talk about the general fund budget overview, looking at expenditures. So these two charts are just taking what is our expenditures in the general fund and looking at them in 2 different ways. So the left-hand chart you see is basically breaking out the appropriations by classification. So it includes operations, equipment, capital improvement projects, debt service, and contingency funds. So that kind of shows you that the majority of our budget is operating budget each year. And then on the right-hand side is just looking at those expenses in a different way, as far as breakout between personnel, contractuals. So those are all the contracts. Maybe we have consultants, commodities. We see those as physical things that we're purchasing. Capital, which in this case includes operating capital, so fleet, as well as CIP, which is our big projects. In this one, the 21 million includes things such as the STEM facility, design for our fire facilities that you're going to actually hear more about in these conversations in the upcoming weeks. And then our charge to and from. So this credit is actually what we call our indirect costs or cost allocation. So this is the recovery that the general fund receives for all of our shared services. So for example, budget section, finance management services, actually in total, we're all shared services. We support the entire city. So we do a cost allocation process each year, and our costs are spread among the other funds that we support. So general fund gets relief for the costs of those. This includes things like IT, legal, there's a number of those shared services. So on that chart, I think the interesting thing to point out is you can see the biggest cost in the general fund is our people. So personnel costs are the largest chunk of our budget. Here is the same information that you just saw on the last slide, and it is just broken out a different way. And this is by division. So you can see general administration, fire, police, planning and development, public works, economic vitality, non-departmental, city engineering, pros and housing are all of the different divisions that we kind of talked about a few slides ago that are in the general fund. This is how that overall budget is broken out. You can see general administration is a big chunk of that at 29.7 million. And again, general administration includes city manager, HR, IT, city attorney, the city's court, communication and civic engagement, and management services. So a lot of those shared services. And then you can see our next two biggest portions of that are police and fire, and then down the line from there. Slide. Now we're going to go into looking a little bit deeper into our actual 2026 budget requests. So these are all of the requests in the general fund that came in during the 2026 budget process versus how we were able to approve them. So you can see this first slide is all of our ongoing requests. So ongoing requests are things that are in the nature of supporting operations, things we need every year to support the overall services of the city. We did break these out a little bit. So you can see the first column is the requested. So we had about $19.8 million in budget requests in 2026 from all of those divisions that you saw in the previous slide in the general fund. They included personnel, which includes a whole variety of things. So we broke them out a little bit, which includes new positions or reclassifications or reorgs that we do in the city. Pay for performance and step plan merits. So that's our pay increases for performance in the city. We have market adjustments. So the city has been looking at all of our positions over the last 4 years, comparing to market and trying to bring all of our pay plan positions up to market. Benefit increases and then other. So this includes contract services, retirements, overtime, ad pays, things like that. So then we have contractuals, commodities, and capital. Interesting thing is you can see the approved ongoing. So this is what we were actually able to approve in the general fund for that $19.8 million worth of ongoing needs. We were only able to approve just under $6 million. And you could see 100% of that is in personnel and compensation. So general fund has a lot of ongoing needs and not the capacity to fund all of them. One note I do want to say in this slide where there's an asterisk up there of net of offsets. So this is truly the net number. So for example, if we had grants that were 100%, their net is 0. So it's net of any offsets. The biggest offsets are grants. We do have some outside contributions for some items, but just wanted to note that they are net of those. And then the approved one-time of $5.8 million. Those are things that while we know as an organization we need these ongoing, we didn't have the capacity in our 10-year plan to fund them ongoing. So we actually funded them one time. And then every year we have to keep bringing those requests back as an ongoing need because we're only able to fund them one. So you can see the need is much greater than the revenue resources we currently have in the general fund, or should I say new revenue resources. Next one are the actual requests that came in that were truly requested as one-time items. So there's a variety of things that might be in here if there's a special project or there's a consultant coming in to do some kind of study, things like that, that are truly one-time need in nature. So they request them as one-time. So under personnel, again, that includes contracted services, retirements, overtime, any ad pays. Usually overtime and ad pays are requested in the ongoing. These numbers are more if there's a contracted position, say we have some kind of service that we need to hire an outside contract service for a couple of years to help with, or retirements, because those are one-time in need. And then all the other requests. So you can see in our one-times, we had $32.4 million of requested items during the fiscal year 26 process. And then we were only able to approve 13.4 million of those. Once again, net of all the offsets. So again, even in our one-time needs in our general fund, we do have more needs than we are able to budget for. And the biggest contractuals is a big one, but capital is another large one. So we do have a lot of needs in the general fund for facility projects, fleet purchases, things like that, going up in costs or have an aging fleet, and we do have a lot of aging facilities. So kind of now I want to switch into transfers because you'll oftentimes hear us talk about we transfer money to support other funds or other funds support the general fund. So this first slide is for 2026, we're looking at here again, all of the transfers into the general fund. So we have two categories. We have the ongoing. So those are ones that we get every year in the general fund, and then the one time. So I kind of labeled here the highway user revenue fund. So I'm going to talk about ongoing, and then I'll talk about some of the one-time things. But Earth does pay for some right-of-way maintenance into the general fund. So they pay $13,000 a year to help towards that, mainly because Parks does a lot of that work. Beautification, they do transfer from the BBB funds into the general fund for maintenance of streetscapes, right-of-way, and medians for projects that were paid for with BBB funds to begin with. So they pay for the project and then they help to support the ongoing maintenance. Again, PROS is doing the work, so the costs are in general fund for the positions and the needs. So beautification contributes to the general fund transfer. Tourism annually contributes $25,000 towards the 4th of July celebration, which again, PROS puts on that and they have a contribution. And then the recreation fund, so BBB Rec, again, they contribute for foots maintenance, parks operations, and recreation programming. So for parks, those are the maintenance for new parks put in with BBB money, and then they also contribute to actual recreation programming. So those make up the ongoing, so money we get into the general fund every year. The one-time items, the small ones from library fund and economic development, those two are related to a NORESCO project. So it was actually a sustainability project that a very large project. It hit a number of different funds in the city. We actually managed the whole project in the general fund, and other funds that had benefits of that project transferred their part of the cost back to the general fund instead of trying to split it out. So these were like a lot of the upgrades it was over a $4 million project for upgrading to LED lighting, for weatherization projects. I know there was some AC works, a number of things is what that project was. Tourism, so that big one time, most of that one time, not all, there's some other little things. Most of it was actually an additional contribution to the 4th of July celebration this last year for the new days. So we changed what we did this year, and the tourism group helped to fund that project. And then sustainability or SEMS fund. The main item here is actually the SEMS fund contributed to the EcoPass program that the city offers. So for the bus passes that we provide to our employees. Next is the transfers out. So we have a lot of transfers out. The general fund does support a number of other funds or will support projects. So first of all, same setup as the last slide, our ongoing transfers that we have out. First of all is the Housing and Community Services Fund. There is a cap with our funding in that fund that we are now above in the administration costs. So the general fund is paying for those ongoing increases in personnel. Library fund, the general fund does support the operation of our Flagstaff library to the tune of almost $1.6 million per year. The Economic Development Fund, this is incubator debt service. So it's currently classified ongoing. We have a few years left to pay that off and it actually will go away. The Pension Bond Fund, so this big payment is the cost of the debt service on that pension debt. I think Rick had mentioned a couple of weeks ago where the city paid off our unfunded liability. So this is actually the debt service on that. This is the general fund portion. The RIP fund or Water Infrastructure Protection Fund has a contribution as well as the sustainability transfer. This is for personnel. So in sustainability, there's a number of positions that are working on things that don't qualify for emergency management or this environmental management. I'm all about emergency. Environmental management fee. So the general fund actually pays for portions of those positions. And then the airport fund, currently the general fund is ongoing supporting them for operational needs of almost $292,000 a year. As far as one-time items go, for housing, the one-time you see in 2026 are actually for additional housing incentive funds. We had transferred over $1 million the previous year. Library, this is an example of the library did not have enough funding to complete their window replacement project. So the general fund is contributing $1 million to that over $2 million project. The RIP fund, the number you see here, that's a contribution for the general fund for the design of their new facility. Capital project fund, in this case, most of this is USGS renovations for our buildings up there with USGS. And then for sustainability, the items that are one time, these are all the things that we approved in the SEMS fund for sustainability related projects that again don't qualify for the fee. The general fund has to pay for that. And then airport. There were a number of things that needed to be done in operations out at the airport. So the general fund did contribute $1.2 million towards those projects in 2026. This is a lot, so let me know if you have questions. So now kind of changing gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the budget history and some of the challenges we have in the general fund, specifically related to our employees and our people. So in recent years, the city has had quite a challenge with employee retention, recruitment, and our market competitiveness. So as an organization, we have, as you can see, that's the biggest part of our budget. They are what the city runs by, our amazing employees. So we as an organization have really focused on how do we improve these big challenges. As most of you probably know, it's very expensive to have high turnover rates and vacancy rates. Cost-wise for training and bringing in new people, as well as burnout of those that are remaining. So just some examples of the areas we had recruitment issues. We've had significant issues with police emergency communication specialists or dispatch operators. We continue to struggle in this area while improvements have been made. Police officers, again, good news is they're doing better, so that's great. Equipment operators, specifically CDL drivers, they're hard to get. We're competing with the county and others. Water services operators, we had some really large struggles with, as well as our entry level positions. And like I mentioned, our market competitiveness. As an organization, we had fallen behind market, and we've really been working the last 4 years to more than 4 years to get us back to market, and made significant strides last year.
Just a question. Who do we compare ourselves when we're talking about market competitiveness? Who are we competing with?
There's a number, I want to say 26, I could be, there's a whole 26-ish benchmarks cities that HR looks at when they compare our market information. So statewide, we look at that, as well as obviously market local, NAU, county, those are things, local groups. But there's a number of factors, and I'm not the HR expert on that. All the
Add a
pieces,
little
but
bit. They're looking at organizations that provide similar services. So full service cities, they have positions that match. We were here at the city of Flagstaff. And then NAU and the county, although there's going to be some differences because they're not municipal government, because it's such a high competition with them to keep our employees or to attract employees that already live within Flagstaff. That's why we keep them as comparatives.
You know, one of my thoughts on that is that we're competing against other statewide communities. How are we factoring in that here in Flagstaff, we have one of the highest cost of living communities in the state? So comparing us to, for example, a community in the valley, even though they may be of similar size and similar, I don't know how we can compare our market to that market because they have a much lower cost of living than we have. And I just wonder how are we factoring in that whole equation into that?
How we have addressed that within our organization with this market competitiveness is we've looked at other high cost of living municipal organizations. So as an example, we include Henderson, Nevada. Although they're not in our state, they have those similarities that I talked to, and they have a similar cost of living. And so that's how we as an organization made that recommendation to council. They supported that we have a handful of those benchmark organizations that help address that cost of living. Another way you can do it is through like multipliers or some calculations to address cost of living differences. But as an organization, we haven't done it that way in probably over 20 years. So that's how we've addressed that specific cost of living component, is to try to find comparables.
Real quick, I guess following up on Rick's question, sorry, I'm just a little slow on the uptake here. For competitive organizations with higher cost of living, what about within Flagstaff in this market, but private employers that might be that you might be competing with for some of those positions that were on that list? Are those factored in at all?
Really hard to be able to get private organizations to share their data. Sometimes we can get it indirectly, right? If they're advertising in the paper, we might be able to see it that way in order to see, what are those other organizations doing to attract folks. I know in like parks and recreation, we sometimes can see it that way. Or if folks come and try to offer our public works employees or parks and recreation employees positions, they might share, this is what they're offering me, so we can get it anecdotally that way as well. But trying to get that private data is super.
Yeah, understood. I guess I would just hate to see the city kind of be behind the 8 ball due to having as much real world data as possible. And I understand it's difficult to get that private info, but you could
One of the
ask around and maybe some of us could be helpful. I mean, when baristas in this town are making $24 an hour as a data point, that probably matters for some of the positions that you might have turnover issues with.
Absolutely. When In-N-Out came into the community, that was another one that we heard about quite a bit. I think one of the things that our HR team is doing is they're trying to look at consultant organizations that collect some of that private data to see if it's cost effective for us to be able to buy some of that, to get some of that private components We don't do that right now.
So here are some of the things that as an organization we have done in recent years to address the challenges we just talked about. So we actually, few years ago, were able to build in our pay for performance and step plan pay increases into the entire 10-year plan in all of our funds. So not just general fund, but all of our funds. So we really worked and as an organization to take that ongoing capacities we had and build it into compensation long-term. Because prior to that, we were not always able to have the whole 10 years of those items, which was super important to our employees. So it was definitely important when we were able to do that. They felt the security of knowing that we have now funded ongoing our pay for performance. Not to say if we were to have a recession that would not have to be put on hold again, but we do have minor recessions built into those plans. So we should be able to fare through those unless there's a significant recession. Another thing we did is we did market adjustments. So we spent as an organization the last 4 years reviewing positions related to relevant market data. And I'm happy to say that in fiscal year 26, we actually funded the last group of positions that hadn't been. So I want to say market adjustments have been fully funded and that they're done. But obviously that first group that was done 4 years ago is probably many of them behind market again. But at least we were able to get through all of the positions, which was a commitment we made to our organization and our employees. In fiscal year 26, just to give you an idea what those costs were, $4.3 million was the investment ongoing that the city made to make those final market adjustments. And of those, police and fire were actually brought to full market for the first time, and they were one of the largest components of that. Another thing the city has done in recent years is they have increased their starting wage. We've done starting wage adjustments. We are trying to keep ahead of the minimum wage that was approved census initiative. So as the last couple of years CPI adjustments, it's now approaching back to the city's starting wage. So that's something I think we'll be looking at again in 2027's budget of are we able to increase it? Like you said, right now, $18.50 is our starting wage, which is much below a $24 an hour barista. So hence I think why we still struggle in those entry level positions. We've also improved our benefit cost share and options. So a number of years ago, our family coverage, for example, benefit cost share, we were actually a little bit behind the county. So we were receiving a number of employees that were going to the county because they had a better cost share ratio or pay, which is why we look at them too. So the organization, we did change that cost share ratio to increase it, and we've maintained that over the last few years. And with the benefit health insurance increases that we saw in 2026, that cost was actually an additional $100,000. In 2026, the organization also went to tiered medical, dental, and vision plans to give more options to our employees. So here is just a little bit of information on to show kind of our vacancy rates. You can see, so back in 2020, COVID, we did have lower vacancy. The vacancy rate's the blue line, the orange line is our turnover rate. So we were lower back pre-COVID. And then through the COVID era and pandemic, we did see significant increases in our vacancy rates and turnovers. We really, like I said, the last 4 years have been really focusing on market and the other things that I mentioned to try to improve ourselves. And you can see that fortunately those rates are declining. You can see a very significant turnover reduction between 2023 and 2020. So hopefully positive direction that we're moving with all of the work we've done. Well, moving past kind of our investing in employees of our current employees, now we're looking at, before you is the staffing request history over the last 5 years that we have received in the general fund. So for each fiscal year, you'll see a requested column and an approved column. So these items are only on the list if the position was approved ongoing. So there's a number of times that position may be asked for ongoing and we can only fund it one time. So those are not included on here. But you can see back in 2022, we had requests in the general fund of about 25.5 positions, and we were able to approve 19. In 2023, we had 19 and a half positions and we were only able to fund 9. And then going down the line, you could see 24, we had 46 new positions. We were only able to approve 15. This number's a little bit skewed because that is the year that we were asked, that fire came forward asking for funding for the new hospital that didn't go through. So we didn't fund the positions. But still you could see we had outside of fire, a lot of needs and we weren't able to approve all those positions. And then in 25, you can see the need's still there, 38, we were only able to approve 4. And then in 26, we had 30 and we can only approve 3. You can see that most of our ongoing capacity, which is what we use in positions, we don't like to approve positions one time. It's hard to recruit and retain people if it's not a fully funded position. But you can see most of our ongoing capacity, as we just talked about in the compensation and market and all those things we've done, has been using up most of the ongoing capacity available in the general fund. Hence, we can approve and support less and less positions. I think I see us and Victor.
Yeah, this is Vince from Guardian. Hey, on the requested side, are those FTEs? Is that what that means? The 4 is 4 FTEs, the 1 is a 1 FTE, the 0.2 is an actual 8-hour position. Is that what that means?
Yes, they're full-time equivalent.
All right, got it. Thank you.
Good advantage.
Got another question. Okay.
Sure.
Go ahead, BJ.
Yes. First, but before saying this, I want to say I'm not in favor of AI taking jobs. I'm in favor of repositioning them in other roles, but in looking at our finances and for personnel, where is AI being utilized or looked into to take up some of the slack that we might be having personnel issues or any other issues that may arise? And why is information technologies not being approved for any jobs in the last slide? And is that where AI would be researched?
Yeah, Sean Conley, I'm your police chief. I really appreciate the mindset in that conversation. We're in our new Axon package. We have a product called Draft One. So the conversation is for police officers as they go call to call all day long. They sometimes on the shift will stack reports where they have to go back at the end of their shift of responding to calls. And we identified spending a tremendous amount of money in overtime and report writing on the back end of shifts, a significant amount. And with the Draft One product, the body camera now, with the new camera, does a couple things. Not only does it speak 55 different languages, but there is an AI transcription product. And I want to be very clear on what that is. It's not sucking out information from outside the world. It's simply using. So if Mark and I are having a conversation and he's a victim of a crime, in real time, that camera is now writing that police report. And we're projecting anywhere from a 3 to 13 minutes. So the officer that report would be written. They would sit down in the car after the call. And in 3 to 13 minutes, it's going to produce the report. There's a review process of checks and balances to make sure it's accurate. For example, they might throw the red dog jumped off the bridge, just anywhere in there, and they've got to pick that out. And so we anticipate once we get Draft One fully operational, that AI tool reducing costs. There's also conversations nationally. I was involved in a research project in DC where we took 100 of the best dispatchers across the country and put them into a product called Sarah. And then she dispatched against what were 3 of the best Metro DC dispatchers, and she smoked them. She wasn't exposed to micro trauma. She showed up to work every day. She right. And so I think, to your point, I think I can't speak for the other divisions, but there are some operational things as we evolve and as community gets more comfortable with technology enhancements where we can enhance our operational prowess with those technologies. Now, as far as them replacing first responders and some of that, drones as first responders is another conversation. Cities now are leveraging drone technology based on AI CAD dispatching. That drone is responding. 30% of the calls we go to, by the time we get there, we're not needed.
Okay.
About that. Or the problem's gone, or there's just, and that drone's getting overhead and saying there's nobody at the Circle K right now matching any of those descriptions. There's no victim there. So I think that's where we're trying to leverage the AI technology. And I hope that answered some of your questions. And I think it gets hard when you look at some of the first responder aspects of it.
Thank you. And is that being looked at with other divisions within our city? Not just first responders?
I think I can answer kind of high level to touch on the IT thing. So you may not see, we haven't approved positions related to looking at AI, but we have approved new softwares that are AI supported. So I know as an organization, we are starting to look at that. I know a lot of groups are using AI to help write emails or help draft reports and things like that. So I think as an organization, it's so new, we're starting to look at it and we have invested some resources in it, just not necessarily positions. Another thing is specific to IT. They actually were approved a position during 2026, one-time program manager position. We're looking at a number of software updates in the new ERP system. So they actually had funding for a program manager to help with that so that their current staff can have some alleviation. So they may not have an ongoing position, but we have done a lot of approving of software and project management positions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Vince, did you have
Yeah.
another question or comment? Okay, great, thanks.
Yes, from the previous slide, are those additions or are they replacements or are they a combination of both?
They're all new positions in the
Okay, so
approved
they're additions.
columns.
Okay. Thank you.
So sorry. Okay. So here's just a little bit of expenditure history related to operating capital. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see what we actually have as our annual set aside. You can see we have very limited resources in the general fund to meet operating capital needs. So in our fleet, we have an annual set aside of $765,000. Facilities capital renewal projects. So we're talking the larger capital projects that we need in facilities like new HVAC units, full remodels, roof replacements, things like that. So I'm not talking maintenance of carpet cleaning. I'm talking the big projects. We have $231,000 ongoing set aside. And then within pros, they have an operating capital set aside of $310,000. So when I say set aside, that is money we have set aside every year in our 10-year plan to meet these needs. So ongoing. In the last few years, we have a number of needs. Our fleet is aging, our facilities are aging, a lot of our equipment is aging. So while we have had capacity, some of which came from those building permits we talked about when we have those big spikes and we have the one-time capacity, these are the kinds of projects we spend it on. So in recent years, we've done an additional $1.5 million investment in our fleet facilities and IT infrastructure. So those groups have gotten $500,000 each to help advance replacing our fleet, making facility upgrades, and IT infrastructure needs. We've also done energy efficiency improvement. That's that Noresco project I talked about. So we invested $4.4 million into those improvements. We've done over $2.6 million in public safety radio and equipment replacements. This last year, the city hall chillers went out. So that was a $600,000 investment to replace the very ancient chillers. We did purchase 2 quints, upwards of $4 million for 2 pieces of equipment. So as you can see, fleet costs are rising. And then in fiscal year 26, we have replacement needs for the J Lively chillers out at the ice rink of $2.1 million.
Shannon, can I also add, I think to this conversation too, as we make strides to be more innovative with technology, to reduce sometimes operational costs and needs, I also want to preface the conversation with, here's the example, in the last Axon package. So that's Axon's doing all our evidence.com, our body worn camera technology, our new taser technology. You know, that was a roughly $250,000 a year package, right? Over the course of that nowadays in new costs with new technology and trying to be more modern and efficient, that's a $625,000 package a year. And so when we have these conversations about our capacity to be innovative and move forward, there's also the understanding, I hope, that things are more expensive to be, and I know there's examples across all the divisions as we try to innovate and be more efficient with this technology, that those costs are also increasing and putting pressure on us operationally. That makes sense.
And do we have some data information regarding things that we're doing to be more efficient as to what is the actual return on the investment? What is the actual savings to the city as we improve technology to make us more efficient? What does that actually do in terms of the dollar impact on our budget? The energy efficiency improvements, how much money are we getting back from those improvements? I think it's important for the community to understand we're spending this much money. We know that the costs of doing these things is going to continue to go up, which I think everything is going up, so we all understand that. But what is the return on the other side? What are we getting as a result of these programs that we're taking on?
I don't have numbers right off the top of my head. We'd have to get back. A couple things that I do know, like for the Noresco project, we were just doing those and we're doing fiscal 5, so I don't think we're even seeing the benefits stuff because they weren't all complete for a whole fiscal year. So I'm hoping we'll start to see those. I do know we received some big rebates. I don't remember the whole total amount for implementing some of those projects and things we've done. But I don't know a lot of it. I don't know that we have a way really to capture things that are, we haven't captured costs to look at ROI, like on transcribing and police, which is new as well. I mean, their new contract. So.
Well, if it's saving us from overtime, from all this overtime that we're spending writing reports, and now we're spending less time writing reports, well, we can transcribe that into what is that saving us on that side of the deal.
Example.
Still new.
Yeah, I think an example, if I'm trying to help out with where you're going mentally on that, an example is if I'm spending $1.8 million in overtime, with 2/3 of that overtime being report writing at the back end of shifts, and I'm looking to cut somewhere between 3/4 out of that, there's your number. That cost benefit analysis is super important. So I like before you embark upon something, right? And so then you spread that out over the course of the years. The other part of it is a return on the service model, right? So if those officers are able to spend more time engaging community and non-business related contacts, not just responding to call after call, there's a value on that as well from a service perspective.
Sure. And the other part of where I'm kind of going with that is if we're saving a fair amount of money on overtime, does that translate to being able to put one more officer on the street? For example.
Yeah, we have these conversations
So you-
about my overtime budgets.
I mean, if it's a break even kind of thing, I think it's easier for the community to absorb that we're adding one or two or three more officers on the street, but it's not really costing us any more money because we're saving over here.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of where I'm thinking.
Got to connect the dots.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
If I may, one of the returns on investment also is the impact on efficiency of the work life of our firefighters. For instance, we're piloting an AI program now that assists them in report writing at the end of each incident. That becomes a very important piece when we have fire stations that are doing 3,500 calls a year. And so we find, you know, the return on investment isn't always going to be money saved. It's not always going to be a tangible benefit in the context of something you can count. I tell you that we're counting the number of calls our folks are going on, and we're very concerned about their activity level and the amount of work we're asking them to do. So efficiencies like AI, we're looking into very seriously just to try to improve their performance and their mental health at work, for crying out loud. That's the big deal for us, is they're really seeing a lot of calls and they're seeing the community's trauma. And so anything that we can do to make their report writing, that administrative piece, more efficient is an important task for us. But we don't necessarily find those things that are figuring out a way through AI to create some economies in a service that is very much still a manual, physical service. And so we don't see those types of savings realized, but it's certainly important for us to try to find ways to improve our performance.
Sure.
I think that impact on work environment goes back to some of those challenges that Heidi talked about earlier in retention. Right? If we're not going to do it here, there's nothing that says someone can't go down to Avondale or Tempe or Queen Creek and do the work down there where maybe they have that more supportive work environment. So sometimes even if it's not about that bottom line ROI, it can certainly be about retaining employees, which does impact indirectly your ROI because you're spending less money doing time in training. So I think it's all related in various ways.
The other part of that too is if you can find those savings, whether it's in efficiencies with AI or report writing, and then put that in a different place. For right now, to Shannon's point, officers and maybe even firefighters around the state, it's like college football right now. Facilities matter. They're shopping facilities, locker rooms, bars. And so when we can do that type of stuff, or it's demands of a shelter wanting a dedicated squad of officers or a downtown, that allows me to play chess with some different avenues when we look at those types of abilities to be efficient with those.
Discussion, any other questions or comments?
Slide. Here is just a few examples of recent years capital improvements that we have done as an organization in the general fund. So some of the major projects we've done in the last 5 years include an investment over $3 million in fiber. This is a number of projects to connect the fiber between city facilities as well as participating in getting us a new internet provider in the city. We're contributing from the general fund to the facility design for fire station number 7, the fire admin building, the police expansion, as well as I mentioned before, the wildland facility via transfer. We did a big city hall remodel in the last year at 1.6 million. Just did all the siding on the Aquaplex, which was a $1.5 million project. We're building a new education facility at 3 million. And then, like I said, we're contributing to the library window replacement project at 1 million. As well, in fiscal year 2026, we have the general fund contributing to the flag project in the amount of $5 million.
Was the education facility, was that related to a city department or?
That's the new STEAM center at Murdoch. Am I getting, or not?
It's at Montalvo.
Montalvo. See, I get all the M's.
Old fire station that they tore down. It's being redeveloped or rebuilt as the education facility that a member of the community will run after it's built.
Thank you.
So now just kind of an overall, where is the general fund at? So I'd love to share just some positive notes. We do have a diverse mix of revenue resources in the general fund, as you've seen. 38% sales tax, 39% shared revenues, and 23% property tax, as well as others. We've made a significant investment in our employee compensation and benefits. We do have a healthy fund balance in the general fund. We are at or above the 20% over the next 10 years. So we are balanced at this time. We have had significant one-time resources in recent years that have been available for budget years for capital and maintenance needs, as I just shared. A lot of one-time resources actually came out of the COVID pandemic. The city had gone into a recession plan and reduced spending because we didn't know exactly what the impacts of that were going to be. And they weren't as deep in the city of Flagstaff. So that created a lot of one-time capacity that allowed us to do some large things in recent years. As well as, like I mentioned before, we have primary property tax capacity that's available if council so choose to approve that. Some definite areas of concern are revenue growth slowdown. It's hard to increase ongoing capacity with no revenue growth or slow without the creation of new revenue streams. The cost of wage growth and market and pay and inflation, those are expensive. As I mentioned, the personnel is the largest piece of this fund. So increased costs in any of the areas related to personnel are expensive overall. We have a limited ability to fund ongoing and new program needs. A portion of the annual operating budget is funded with one-time resources, as I shared when I showed you what's been asked for as ongoing needs, and we can only fund one time. We have an increased need and cost for fleet replacement funding. A lot of this is driven by the city's electric vehicle policy and the cost of new fire apparatus. As you can see, a Quint costs upwards of $2 million for one engine. Significant additional resources are needed for facility maintenance and repairs. So
I've been arguing this point with the city for quite some time now. Council, I'm going to be meeting with Joanne next week, and I'm going to be talking about this. I think another area of concern that should be included in this is the data that indicates almost 50% of all home buyers are buying their homes outside of the city limits. And this affects our abilities to be successful in economic development. It affects our traffic. It affects our abilities to be successful in climate neutrality, our carbon neutrality plan. It has a huge impact on the city. It reduces the amount of property taxes that we're collecting. So there's a whole lot of multiple impacts because more and more people are buying their homes outside of the city limits looking for an affordable house to buy. Okay, and they have no choices. I think that is a huge area of concern and it ought to be on this list.
with that wraps up general fund. So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about our Water Resource Infrastructure Protection Fund, or RIP, as you may hear us refer to it. Just a little background on what the RIP fund is and what the Water Resource Infrastructure Protection Fee is. So this was a new fee and fund created in fiscal year 2021, which was approved by council. This was a need to establish a sustainable, stable, and long-term initiative to maintain investments in watershed and city water infrastructure via the Wildland Fire Protection Management Program. Previously, this program was mostly funded by a bond, which is one-time funding. So when those funds ran out, we as an organization started considering how do we fund that program, which we all know it's an ongoing need for the city. It also used to be funded a bit by general fund and grants. So the new fee was based on water consumption, a basis for proportional share. The original fee was 52 cents per 1,000 gallons, effective in August of 2020, and it's now up to 53 cents. So this annual fee actually produces revenues of about $1.3 million. So the RIP fund, the revenues are very limited in this fund. So you can see the fee that we just talked about produces about $1.3 million. You can see intergovernmental is actually the largest revenue in this fund, $2 million, and this is all grants. And then very small investment earnings. So you can see 71% of total revenues projected for 2026 are coming from grants. Much like the general fund slide, you can see this is the overall RIP fund expenditures. I did pull out grants from this just so that it is a little bit more relevant to what is actually funded ongoing in our RIP fund. Since grants are one-time funded, they're important. They're allowing us to move a lot of things forward, but kind of wanted to talk about ongoing operations. So much like the slide you saw in general fund, the left-hand side is by classification. So you can see most of the expenses in the RIP fund are operating.
Let me interrupt just a second. We've got a hand up.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I can't see who that is.
Question on the WRIP fund. What is the projected increase? I know everybody's water bills are going up over the next 5 years. How is that going to affect that fund, and what is the projected increase for that fund?
They currently do not have any approved rate increases. Theirs is based on usage. It's the 53 cents per 1,000 gallons. So currently we're not expecting any growth except for if there is increased usage.
Thank you.
And on the right-hand side, just like the general fund, you can see personnel services, so broken out by type. Personnel services are the largest part of this fund as well at 72% of total costs. They do have a small contractual and commodity budget and a small capital budget. Overall, a $1.3 million operating budget for this fund. This slide is just kind of showing the history of the RIP fund staffing. So when that new fee went into effect in 2021, you can see that we had 4 positions, full-time equivalent positions in this group. With the new fee, they actually were able to add 5 seasonal full-time equivalent positions with the fee. Shortly after that, in fiscal year 2023, the group decided to look at how better to utilize their positions and their staff. And they actually also had sometimes issues with recruitment, and the decision was made that they would move all of their positions into the fire pay plan. So with the limited funding that comes into this fund, the decision was made that they actually reduced one seasonal full-time equivalent position in order to do that. These seasonal positions were not PSPRS eligible, et cetera, prior. So moving them into the fire plan was very expensive. That is what we did in order to do that move. And then after that, we actually moved all seasonal positions into permanent full-time positions without having to further reduce. But now they have a full-time staff year-round. Some positive things in the RIP fund is this group has now allowed us to have some proactive management of our wildlands. It's a great grant matching resource. State appropriation for wildland fire training facilities. So that facility that I talked about, the design work is being funded by the general fund. We've received a large $4 million from the state. While those two is not enough to finish the facility, it's a huge portion of that. They do receive a lot of federal funding and grants for supporting this program. And they require minimal support from the general fund, which is always nice. Some areas of concern is, as we all know, the wildfire risk is increasing in our community, which adds additional funding needs and the need for additional resources. Operating costs in this fund is outpacing the revenue growth. As I mentioned, when 72% of your fund is people and we're expensive, especially with the 3.5% estimated at least increase because of step increases, that's pricey. Only a portion of the fire training facilities funded, and there's limited funding for apparatus replacements. So right now you can, in their fund, we have about $100,000 a year set aside for operating capital. And as I mentioned, one quint is $2 million, but their apparatuses can be close to $1 million or 750,000. So they're not cheap. Oh, moving on. I know that was quick, but they're a lot smaller than the general fund. I want to talk a little bit about airport fund. So similar to what you've seen now in general fund and the RIP fund, here is the airport fund revenues. So on the left-hand side, you can see overall revenues is about $14.3 million projected. I did on the right-hand side pull out their intergovernmental, which is grant funding again, so you can kind of see what their operating revenues that they have ongoing at the airport are. I felt like the left side was a little bit misleading because 80% of their revenues in 26 are estimated for intergovernmental, which those are grants, but those grants are supporting capital improvement projects, not operating costs. So trying to kind of look at operating to operating. So on the right, you can see they have airport charges, rents for the facility. We have passenger facility charges. Not everyone knows what those are, but those are up to a $4.50 charge per employment at the airport. Those fees can be used to fund certain very restricted projects and maintenance items as restricted by FAA. There's a very long and strenuous application process to go through to get that done. We're actually working on that right now to help try to get the final funding to the snow removal equipment building project out there. They have parking revenues, investment earnings, and some other excuse me, miscellaneous revenues. So about $2.9 million annual. Again, same slides as you've seen on the others. You can see that at the airport, their total $16 million budget for the year, about 4.9 million of operations, and then $11.2 million in capital improvement projects. That is mostly the new snow removal equipment building. And then on the right-hand side, they do have personnel services of about 1.8 million, contractual costs of about 2.9. And again, the capital is large at 10.6. So here is a little bit of staffing history at the airport. So this is total airport. So The airport does have 2 or actually now they're up to 5 positions that are what we call general administration. And then they have the aircraft rescue and firefighting group. As you can see, that group was 7 full-time equivalents up until fiscal year 2019, where we added 3 new airport operations and ARF specialists due to the airport going to Index B. We also, in recent years at the airport, have moved the schedule of these employees to a true 24/7 operation. And much like RIP, this group did not used to be in the fire pay plan. And we did move all those positions into the fire pay plan, which came with an increased cost. Staffing. So airport funds, some positive notes that we do have is that we receive a significant amount of federal funding for capital improvement program, as well as we received over $18 million during the pandemic time that we were able to use for operating costs and operating maintenance improvements. So the airport saw great things happen as a result of all that federal funding. We do have a new airport lease for their 31.45 acres. So hopefully that project will be moving forward and in the future, not yet, but in future years can start to increase and provide a new revenue stream out at the airport to help with their operating. And currently, actually, last night we went to council and got a couple new fees approved. First read approved for the airport for badging fees and some new fees related to the parking, as well as an increase to parking fees and those new fees in July of 2026. On top of that, we are working to get a consultant and look at other revenues and do an actual rate study of our airport revenues, or our airport. Some areas of concern is the need, the increased need for general fund support for operations and maintenance. We had hoped that the need on the general fund support side would decrease. We were doing much better at the airport when we had a second airline. So after losing our second airline, it's been a little bit more of a struggle. And I think that's impacting our parking revenues aren't what we thought they were going to be. They were trending much higher when we had 2 airlines. So some of those things are impacting that. Our aging infrastructure and maintenance costs at the airport continue to increase significantly. I am just amazed by the costs of running an airport and what it costs just to put striping on the runway. And the need for a second airline to regain our enterprise fund status and just overall health of the airport. I'm just going to talk about some overall public safety. Oh, sorry. Here is just a look at the 10-year history of our public safety budgets. So when I talk public safety, in this case, we're talking about police, fire, emergency management, RIP, and ARP. This is true operating budget, excluding capital. I do on the next slide have a little bit of a blow up of these bottom ones because I know they're very small and they're hard to see. So we can first just look at, so blue is police, the orange is fire. So you can see that their budgets were slowly increasing over the years. And then we had a really big drop there in budget year 2022. So just to share, that significant decrease, which you'll see in all of the groups except for emergency management, because they're not in public safety retirement system, is actually when we did the payoff of the unfunded liability for PSPRS. So prior to 2022, the costs of those increasing costs were in the personnel, so in the operating budget of all of these groups. When we did the refunding, the cost of those PSPRS rates declined drastically, and actually that cost now moved into debt service. So their budgets, yes, they dropped here, but it's just because the money is shifted to paying the debt on that unfunded liability. Here's just a little bit more of a breakout. You can see RIP is the yellow line and ARF is the green line. You could see they also all have dips in that fiscal year 2022. You can see RIP created in 21. And then you could see a little emergency management line here, established in 2023. There's just kind of another way, or a way to look at the staffing for overall public safety. So you can see of all of our public safety staffing, the blue is our police, the red is fire, the little green is our ARF team, the blue is the RIP, and then the kind of, which you can't really see them, just little emergency management, because they have one dedicated employee. This next slide is just kind of, for me, an easier ways to see the overall public safety staffing. So you can see between 2017 and 2026, the police have gone from 167 full-time equivalents to 183. Fire has gone from 89 to 109. ARF went from the 7 to 10. RIP went from the 4 to 8. And then emergency management, since they were established in 2023, they're still one. So our overall public safety staffing has gone from 263 full-time equivalents to 311 since 2017. For this slide, I'm going to hand over to Shannon.
Thank you. So similar to our conversation earlier, there was the question about who do we compare ourselves to? So we did pull a few municipal organizations, went through their budget books to try and provide some points of comparison. So I won't read all these numbers to you, but just want to maybe talk through a couple of components. So for instance, in the Flagstaff line, we're the first line. If you look at the public safety full-time equivalents of the 293, I did not include those airport employees in that specific number. Because again, in most of these other areas, public safety is part of the general fund. So I really tried to keep our comparisons to general fund. The other component that I took out of these and why you'll see its total operating budget is I tried to remove capital numbers out of that budget as well, because you'll have some organizations that budgeted $29 million for capital. That can really swing what you're looking at as far as a number. And I wanted to try and narrow it to what we're actually looking at in those day-to-day operations. So those were some of the changes that you'll see in that kind of first line and then throughout the document. A couple of other things that are interested of note: emergency management in the majority of these organizations either exists within fire. In one organization, it was in the Office of Public Safety. And then there were two organizations that actually don't have emergency management. They rely on their county and their state. And that was Yuma and Prescott towards the bottom of that list. A couple of other things that muddied the water a bit that I wanted to call out for you is when we look at Kingman, they actually, their dispatch is considered an internal service fund, so it's not accounted for within their general fund. So when you look at these numbers, as far as the operating budget of this 23.4 million, I did not include that because again, it's a separate funding source. It's not part of their general fund. And so I would be inflating that percentage of operating budget if I included it. So that's why I left it out. So that's one that is a little unique. The one just beneath that, a Prescott, they have an airport that I could not pull out because they didn't give separate numbers within their general fund as well as their personnel. So those are a little bit inflated there within Prescott because they do have a regional airport. And then the last two organizations, Tempe, I could not break out their emergency medical transport because it's built within their fire personnel line item. And even when you went into their department specific budget, it didn't break the two up. So wanted to make you aware of that. And then similar in the very last comparison of Goodyear, they have ambulatory services. They break it up within their fire department, so I could pull that out. So everywhere I had the detail to try and give you that apples to apples, I definitely did that. But if it wasn't in the budget book, I tried to make notes that, you know, this is something that's in there that can make that number a little bit off. But I think it's interesting as you look at these numbers, 43.7, about 43% is the highest percent of operating budget. And that is within that Maricopa, city of Maricopa, not Maricopa County. They provide their highest percentage of operating budget in the general fund to their public safety folks. And then the lowest is that 20% in Yuma. And when you move over to, again, those full-time equivalents, you see a lot of similarities right there in the 30 to 40%. But 50% is the highest percentage again in Maricopa. So they're investing a lot in their public safety. And the lowest is that 29% that we see here in the city of Flagstaff. So really, that's just information for you to have points of comparison. If you have specific questions, go ahead, Rick.
Just a curiosity. When I look at Prescott compared to Flagstaff in terms of the total operating budget, Prescott has a significantly lower population, but they actually have a higher operating budget. How come? I mean, what are they doing that we're not doing as far as?
I don't know that answer off the top of my head, but I did pull all of their budget books. So can I write that down and I will have that answer for you and the rest of the group?
Sure.
Yeah, happy to do that. Other questions that come to mind right now about these comparisons? Is there anything that you want me to look into further? Okay, well, if you think of anything, let me know.
So now I'm gonna step into a little bit more conversation on sales tax. So sales tax or transaction privilege tax, you may hear it called. So just some general information. It is voter approval required. It's dedicated or unrestricted. It may sunset or have no sunset. Half of Arizona cities have a 3% or higher rate. Just for reference, the city of Flagstaff's 1% tax that we currently have produces about $30 million a year in revenues. For an additional, every 0.1% increase produces $3 million, and every 0.25% is about 7.5 million. Here on the right-hand side is just kind of a breakout of all of the components that make up the city's rate. Slide. So we did some comparison work to see where the city's current tax rates fall within the state. So just to share, the sample that we pulled is a sample of 41 cities out of the 91 Arizona cities. The sample includes a variety of slices of information. So included are all cities larger than Flagstaff, all cities in our region, and then all cities that are similar in size. You can see out of the 41 cities that we have polled that currently the city, so speaking truly city sales tax, our current rate, we fall kind of low in the overall with San Luis, Chino Valley, Payson, San Luis and Chino are in the 4%, Payson and higher. You will notice that a lot of the smaller, or the cities to the left here are smaller, but we fall kind of a little bit in the fall last quarter. And if you go to the next slide, we took the same information, the same sample of cities, and we wanted to look at what it looked like as a sales tax rate by total tax rate. So if you look at that, in this scenario, our actual rates compared to the other cities, you can see Flagstaff moves to a much higher overall tax rate. The main reason for that is actually Coconino County's tax rate is one of the highest in the state. So when we're looking at overall rates, they do cause us to move much higher in that. In this case, when you look to all the cities that actually have a higher tax rate than us, they are all much smaller and have a much smaller tax base to generate revenues. This is just a slide to show sales tax rates by city and total. So the total tax rate is the line at the top, and then the city portion is at the bottom. So just looking at that information I just shared on the two previous slides, a little bit different. So when you look at it declining like that, you can see again, overall, our tax rate is higher, but we kind of fall low in the city sales tax.
That's a quick question. So all of those tax rates that you just showed, I mean, one of them was TPT and the other one was total. Do any of those include BBB tax rates as part of the whole?
It does not.
So I
It's
might,
a retail sales tax.
understood. I might comment that if we're going to do comparisons with other peer Arizona cities, that it would be very useful to also see that as a slide. Anecdotally, I think that pushes us quite a bit higher to peer cities. And I think with our visitation and, restaurant and bar sector, that at least needs to be a comparison that, that we see and consider when looking at tax rates.
Yeah, it was on the slide where we were just showing the city information, and so we can look to see if that's available. I can tell you as I've gone through, I think two more forward, sorry. That one right there. So that one, you'll see it's got the BBB, it's got transportation tax, road repair and street safety. So it has all the specialty taxes. I can tell you, as I read all the budget books, there are organizations that have a lot of specialty taxes as well. But I can work with Rick and the team and see if we've got some comparisons that we can
That'd
do.
be helpful. Thank you.
I think the challenge will be is we have a BBB tax, right, where a lot of them
Right.
have
Something
maybe a
else.
hotel only
Yeah.
and not the restaurant bar component of it. So
And maybe we could just figure out like what the highest, whatever they call it is, so that we at least can see that as a, point. yeah, total highest.
the max they can.
I wrote that down as a question.
Okay, well, that wraps up the financial outlook. So thanks. I'm going to hand it over to Shannon for our last few slides for this evening.
Exciting. So what we wanted to do on these last few slides is talk about funding needs, because today is the last day of our financial outlook presentations, and we'll start to move into the different areas of public safety and talking about their specific needs. And so I wanted to give you some insight as to what are those things that you're going to be hearing about over the next several weeks. So for fire, you'll see some similar terminology on all of these. So I'll cover it a little bit more detailed here so that you can see how it maps through the others. So when you see the term current operations, and I will ask for my financial helpers to let me know if I get this wrong. But current operations, when you saw the slide of how we budgeted in fiscal year 25-26, we showed you that there were this many requests and some of them we couldn't fund ongoing. We had to fund at one time. And so current operations is really gathering what is that ongoing need that we are only able to fund with one-time dollars. So that's what you're going to see as we move forward in these various groups under current operations. New positions, that would be, you see station 7 a little bit further down. Well, that's going to be a new fire station. And so with that, we need new fire personnel. And so that's what an example of new positions would be. Training center, we talked about that earlier, that we have partial funding that we've received for the regional wildland fire training facility. But again, there's some additional dollars we need to complete that project. Station 7 is an expansion, so we can use pieces of our development impact fees, still unfunded components of that. The administration facility, we are busting at the seams when it comes to City Hall. And so one of the long-term plans is as we developed further out at JWP, JW Powell, fire administration offsite into a specific fire facility to open that space at City Hall. Station number 2 at Quint, Heidi referenced, that we've purchased 2 Quints, but we need yet another, and price tag about those are about 2 million. And then safe staffing is another component. If I recall correctly, this is having people respond instead of the 3. Okay. So that's what we have that you'll hear more about as we talk about fire. And then we can move on to the next group that you'll hear after fire. Is emergency management. Thank you. We switched them. Yeah, go ahead. Good, no, you're good. Wildland fire management, we've got some separate information on them. Again, current operations, new positions, and then that facility that we talked about on the previous slide. Airport, we have aircraft rescue and firefighting, their current operations. So again, those ongoing needs funded with one time. We've got TSA and security also have current operation needs as well as new positions. And then that aircraft rescue firefighting to make sure that we're able to meet our minimum staffing as well as safe staffing. So you'll hear about those 2 components related to that team. Emergency management, again, current operations as well as new positions. So a little bit fewer asks. And then police are these last 2 slides. Again, current operations, new positions, fleet expansion. So when we talk about fleet within the police department, that's all the police vehicles that you see on the street, whether it's for an officer, a police aide, might be specialized equipment. We also have an incident command vehicle. So that's something that when they're out looking at incidents, it's a space that staff can be out of, the elements, have space to talk with other individuals, have their equipment there on site. They've got some facility expansions as well as the building of a substation at John Wesley Powell. So the same area that we just talked about on the fire side. We also have an evidence warehouse rehabilitation and expansion. This building has seen quite a bit of wear and tear, and the laws have also changed as to the amount of time that we have to retain evidence. So we have a lot more of it. So that's a little bit about what you'll hear on that need. And then the last piece is an integrated regional operations center. So this is something that can help us on many levels, but it's basically similar to an emergency operations center where you have a lot of technology and can see what's going on in the community and what resources you need. And we'll finish up with police on the next slide. An overlap patrol squad. This helps with some of that carryover if they're carried over from an incident or needing to complete crucial reports. A specialty unit, metro unit, their current operations. So again, that's that current operations key where we've got some gaps as well as new positions. A training unit. We do have our high country training center, as well as ongoing training that we are required to maintain for Arizona Post standards. And then the last 2 is a community engagement squad and a criminal investigations unit. So a lot of the things that you see on this particular slide are personnel related, which as you saw during Heidi's presentation has been difficult for the city to cover with our ongoing revenues that exist today. So those are the things that you get to look forward to hearing more about from each of these public safety groups over the next few weeks. I'd love to end today with any other questions or comments that you might have on your mind. Great, well, seeing none, thanks again for being here today. We'll reconvene next Wednesday, December 10th. We'll be here at this facility again at 3.
Yeah.